Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a big day. I want to thank everybody from Luminate in the state of New York as well for giving us a chance to have this completely encompassing talk about ethics and AI in optics in 20 minutes. More seriously, we will continue this conversation afterwards through the Luminate newsletter as well. We're going to keep this conversation going because obviously it is a big topic. I wanted to start out with a few acknowledgments. One, of course, that we can't really talk about ethics and AI in optics or any other field and really keep that in any sort of compact timeline. We really want to use this as a platform for a much larger conversation. Certainly there are lots of current developments. There's a pretty recent meta study about ethics in AI. There have been a lot of detractors from AI generally, specifically because of concerns. Yesterday's development is the CTO of OpenAI stepping down to explore things herself, which I'm not quite sure what that means, but I would imagine that this is probably tied to fundraising in the industry as well. One thing that I did want to acknowledge, and in our conversation prior to the panel here, in terms of ethics and AI, is the use of resources and how that affects the industry as a whole. Certainly not just within optics, but AI training, use. And so I wanted to post that, to pose that opening question to the panel in terms of what should we do about the colossal resource usage that AI requires?
Thank you, Dan. Everyone is looking at me. I guess maybe they remember from last year that, I have allergies to waste, any kind of waste. And as an engineer, power waste has always been driving me crazy. So the technology that I developed was to solve that problem. And, AI right now, it's a buzzword and all of that, but we're doing it in a very brute force approach, and it's very expensive to the environment. If you don't believe me, you should wonder why Amazon bought a nuclear power plant, and then Microsoft is doing the same. The amount of energy used by these humongous models out there is ridiculous, and they also use fresh water. So these are significant impacts to us and the environment, and then when we dive over to the ethical aspect of it, the whole issue of privacy is significant as well. So I would encourage you not to play with ChatGPT because you're burning a lot of energy in the process.
I'll avoid asking how many R's are in strawberry then. I don't want to waste more cycles on that.
So my own personal background, as was mentioned, was spending a long time at Apple. That's actually where I met Chris. We worked on not just Siri, but other kind of Siri adjacent projects. And the AI training, certainly for something like speech recognition and natural language modeling, is certainly a significant use of resources. Again, in one of the many topics that we can't really fully cover in 20 minutes, I'm not sure how we can necessarily unring that bell, right? I don't think that progress is going to stop, but I think the challenge is there to make it so that we're moving forward in perhaps an energy efficient or reusable energy sort of way. So for another topic, there are certainly lots of, as was mentioned, I think 7 of the 10 startups that are here are AI heavy. And one of the questions that always comes up, and not just with startups, but also with larger companies, is exactly the provenance of data, of training data, evaluation data, and the protection of data. Certainly there's, I think, legislation in the pipeline to really kind of tackle some of these issues, whether certainly health data, a big deal. But what sort of considerations should we have for all of these different types of data? And of course, this goes beyond just AI, but all sorts of data generally that we use throughout our businesses.
Yeah, I mean, so we can comment. So we work with SWAT teams and soldiers, and so the data that we capture often is governed by legal restrictions, right? Especially in the EU, there are like a lot of governmental things to think about, but also things about access and about how data is used and who you work with, right? Because your camera used by the wrong person can end up being used to suppress speech or to or show bias in the delivery of justice or lead to somebody getting killed, right? Like there are very deep questions that we wrestle with as a company about how and who our systems end up being used by. And so, yeah, I mean, absolutely. We are in a very constrained environment in some ways by legislation in some of the things that we do, but it's a daily conversation that can be quite heated internally in our company about what we do and we don't do with this information that we are able to capture about the world. Yeah.
So without necessarily asking you to divulge information you shouldn't, but how do you treat sensitive data?
So one of the things that we do is we don't keep it. So when we have these cameras, I've had to guarantee to somebody at 4 in the morning in a panic that absolutely nothing is stored on the device, right? So a lot of what we end up doing is there's this temptation to have the information and to use it to train models or to use it to make your information better. But when it comes to certain applications, there's a responsibility to destroy it, right? To not have data as part of your, as the sort of the ethical and the requirement of what's needed, right?
Charbel, I know that you also had to use some training data, and Chris, I'm sure throughout your career you have as well. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we're developing smarts at the edge, and the edge for us is really the actual pixel in the sensor. So, Chris is holding a standard camera that has an imaging sensor in there. It generates an image that he has to process. We're solving the privacy issue with visual data by putting the smarts at the pixel level. So it doesn't look like an image anymore. It's just data. So you can't associate the output of our sensor with Chris or Dan or anybody else.
And just for those of us who had to look this up before this conversation, Edge AI refers to having AI processing not in a centralized location, but rather on the end device or near the end device that might be in question.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, I think also that there's, some areas and some fields like medical where there's very clear rules about how this data is handled, and so that makes it a little bit easier for those companies. You follow the rules, everything is good. For those who are more consumer-facing, maybe where the rules haven't been written yet, it's important to honor the best wishes that you can expect from the customer. And so one thing that I think about that is kind of wild to me is that companies will actually opt to sell the data that they have to third parties. That seems completely crazy to me. There's no way that your customer would really be too excited about that. Like, hey, you've been using our product and we decided to share it with all these other organizations as well. So I think that because data use is becoming more and more pervasive and prevalent and people are noticing, it's pushing for more legislation. But before that legislation comes, it's important to be a good citizen. And your customers will thank you for it anyways.
I think jumping on that, one of the things that companies could certainly consider early on is precisely what would happen if someone were to find out or it be public that you have done this thing with the data. How would your customers feel? How would you feel about having your data in that situation as well?
I mean, I might go to jail, right? You know, if we mess up handling of evidence of data, if we end up sharing a location that ends up getting somebody hurt, right? Like, it's not only like it's a personal risk, but it's also just the moral weight of getting somebody hurt or somebody, you know, improperly going through the justice system or something, right? It's high stakes, getting data protection right. Absolutely, yeah.
I was just going to say, you know, we're talking about, you know, a company's willingly, you know, sharing the data, right? But the whole issue of cybersecurity, right? How many of you here have received notices that your information have been compromised? I've received 3 so far. Okay, I'm popular with the...
This month?
Almost, yeah, with the national data breach, right? So the issue is much bigger than that, right? So the world, you know, I'm sure you've all heard that now we are in the information age, right? The Industrial Revolution was 100 years ago. Now this is the information, right? So data is and information is the most valuable thing now, right? And so these companies are, you know, that are collecting all that data, it exists somewhere on a server, on a cloud. And the bad people out there are spending their time and energy getting to it, right? So the challenge with AI is now you have a model that's trained to do certain things, and those individuals will access that model too. So it's a weapon, you know, that right now maybe it's not a weapon, but it will become a weapon, right? And it's not a lot of data, right? Like to download videos, you know, that's hard, but to download a model, that's not a lot of data, okay? So that... you know, so that's the challenge, is that even if companies and good citizens exist, thank you for that comment, you know, there are bad people out there that are just going to get to that and use it against, you know, or in a bad way.
And not only, I mean, and we run into this a lot in our space, it's not only individuals that are bad, but like bad state actors with buildings full of people whose entire job going in and like going to the coffee machine every day is like just to hack your data, right? Truly sophisticated actors in the space. It's pretty troubling, yeah.
So, continuing on data, one of the things that, and this is a long recurring problem, certainly from, we also mentioned there was a camera early on in vision detection where if you had a certain skin tone or darker, you weren't seen by the camera, right? And these are, I don't mean to single that company out necessarily, but these are issues that could happen to anyone without kind of a broad concern for the data that's being consumed and used for training. So what are some of the pitfalls that you could point to, or, you know, leading to training bias, or even checking quality is an ongoing task?
Yeah, so one thing I want to call out is that when you have a startup, you're working really, really hard just to get your MVP working. And if you're doing any kind of machine learning or AI work, the second that it starts showing promise, you get really, really excited. But in using AI and machine learning, there are always these biases that present themselves, and you don't find them until later. And so a big part of this when you think about vision is, you know, could skin tone be a factor? Do I have test data with different skin tones? Age could also be a factor. You know, unfortunately, as we get older, we get more wrinkly. We have sunspots and all kinds of blemishes and things. And so can that throw the system off if the system has only been trained on, like, you know, folks who are like 20 or 30 years old? Or a more difficult area as well is, you know, children who you know, if you're taking a picture of like their skin, it might be pristine, but also you might, you know, get more of their hand in it because they have smaller hands. So naturally, as your products are out there, you're going to experience these things. And you can't get ahead of all of them. New things are going to pop up all the time. So the best thing you can do is to try to preempt as much as you can, be as fair as possible in your evaluation data, so making sure that you have good representation from different age groups and those sorts of things. But also, I challenge everybody when they hear from their customers that they're having problems to be really responsive and to really dig into them and take them seriously, because you might just uncover sort of pathological problem with your system. You might think what looks to be like a one-off, like, oh, that's just an error, systems make errors. If you don't take it seriously, you might not notice that your system has this like really glaring issue with a demographic. So that's my best advice.
And have diverse teams, right? That's part of the reason that over and over data shows that diverse teams are more effective. It's just you've got more perspectives that find more blind spots.
Well, I think we've just about run out of time. I will remind you all to certainly sign up for the Luminate newsletter. We're going to be continuing these conversations on there. Thank you all for your time, your participation, for flying in or driving somewhat longer distances, or making time out of your day here in Rochester. Congratulations to all of the startups today. I was here for the first day of pitches, and you all wowed me that day. So congratulations, best of luck.